The Building Brands podcast is dedicated to exploring the journeys of industry leaders who have successfully built a brand. Join me, Robert Royer, president of Building Brands Marketing, and an entrepreneur who has successfully scaled multiple brands as we dive deep into the strategies, challenges, and insights that have shaped the success of industry leaders and provide you with the resources you need to do the same. Building Brands Marketing is a full-service marketing agency specializing in crafting customized marketing strategies for service-based businesses with a creative powerhouse to drive real results. Welcome to the Building Brands Podcast. Welcome to the Legal Leaders series of the Building Brands Podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome a very special guest. We're welcoming Bill Marler, owner and attorney with Marler Clark. Welcome, Bill.
Hey, good to see you.
Bill, I'm excited to speak with you today. I know leading up to this show, I was fascinated to learn more about, you and your firm being the focus of the documentary Poisoned. Lots of folks have seen this documentary on Netflix by now. So talk to me about how the earlier book that you authored and being the focus on that show has helped shape your firm's story over the years.
Well, in many respects, the movie is, obviously it's sort of at the, tail end of my career. I just turned 68. The movie was, finished actually when I was 64. Didn't come out for a year and a half. But, it really tells the story. And I think it was kind of an important thing. Yeah, it talks about like the early days of, the Jack in the Box case. And, it's a little embarrassing to have video of me from 32 years ago on there. But in some respects, it was a really good thing that they talked about really what has been going on in the food safety space, over the last 30 years. And so I think, and the fact that we've played a part in that and trying to make our food supply safer. Obviously my main job is to take care of the clients who retain us. But, at the same time, I've always said for a long time, if you don't like, lawyers, you don't like getting sued, work harder at food safety and put me out of business. And so I really am, I suppose, seeing what I've seen over the last 32 years has changed me a lot. And I think that came out in the book and that came out in the documentary.
Yeah, Bill, one of the things I find fascinating about your line of work is you were, one of the original firms really diving deep into this space. Talk to us a little bit about when you first left your previous law firm and started in this niche and knowing from day one this is a niche that you were going to specialize in, not falling into it accidentally.
Yeah, I mean, if I probably would have thought about it a little harder at the time, I probably would not have done this. The Jack in the Box case had wound down. We had been very successful. Then the Odwalla E. coli outbreak happened, and I was in the middle of that when I was really starting to think about, I wonder if I could make a specific practice in this area. And so I had gone to the partners in my firm and said, hey, I was a partner and young partner. And I said, hey, I think we ought to bring over the former chief counsel for the defense of Jack in the Box. And between the two of us, we knew more about this area of the law than any two people in the entire world. And so they were like, no, he's a defense lawyer. He doesn't have any cases. He doesn't know what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, I think I'm just going to go do this on my own with Bruce Clark. So we started, Bruce and I started Marler Clark in the fall of 1998. I brought with me 2 associates and 4 staff. And so we had a pretty much ready-made firm, but not a lot of work. But at the same time, I had done well in Odwalla, I'd done well in the Jack in the Box case. And we just really worked hard. We got a lot of referrals. The media has always been super interested in this, area. People eat food. They don't think they should get poisoned. Their kids shouldn't die if they eat a hamburger. And so, it really just sort of blossomed. And, there's a handful of lawyers who've put up websites and have tried to sort of make themselves into this space, but they're focused on the litigation side of it, and which is, I understand that. But I spend a bunch of my time trying to teach companies why it's a bad idea to poison people. And I probably do 2 or 3 speeches a month all over the world. It's a lot easier with remote speeches, but so I'm very invested in in a sense trying to put me out of business. I'll tell you a funny story. There was a big food safety conference in Cleveland this year called the International Association of Food Protection. It's kind of the big conference that happens on food safety. And my flight was delayed and I didn't get in until late Sunday night. And I missed the keynote speaker, which was a food safety guy at a big food firm. And at the very beginning, and I saw the video later, at the very beginning, he goes, there's 4,000 people in the audience. And he says, hey, is Bill Marler here? And, people were like wondering where, and they said, we all need to work hard to make sure our food is safe so Bill Marler can retire. And everybody clapped. And I think that's the kind of impact that we've been able to have in the food safety space. It's not just been about, suing companies and, making them accountable for what they, have done, but it's also, really trying to lead in the area of food safety. So I'm very proud of what the firm has done over the last, 30 years. And, I think I've got a few more years left in me to, keep at it.
Yeah, you've certainly left your mark on the industry. I think one of the things I'm always fascinated by speaking to firms that have been in existence as long as your firm with Marler Clark, because there's been so much progression in the legal industry as it relates to marketing over that time frame of, several decades. And like you mentioned earlier, newer firms coming into the picture and throwing up a website and slapping it and saying, slapping the words on it, hey, they're the top, law firm in the United States for these sorts of cases. And, then there's people that have been around since day one, like yourself, since this became more prominent. So there's more and more firms entering the space. Is it also accurate to say that some of the regulatory components have really increased over the years since, say, 30 years ago, where it's a little bit more tightly regulated?
Well, yes, it was, but now not so much. And this is not meant, in any sort of political way. This is just fact. I'd like to go back and talk kind of things that have worked over the years. But, what we've seen just in the last 9 months is, enormous cuts at the FDA, CDC, dramatic changes at Food Safety Inspection Services, outbreaks that were normally figured out by FDA and CDC are now being figured out by me. That's not the way you run a public health system in the United States. It's, we have built up public health, over hundreds of years, to try to protect the public. And there are systems in place that have worked really well. Sometimes they're slow, but, I think the best way is to give you an example. When the Jack in the Box case happened in 1992, 1993, and for that next decade, about 99% of my law firm revenue was E. coli cases linked to hamburger. It took a long time for E. coli to become an adulterant. That was a decision made by the government. And it took about almost a decade for industry to stop fighting it and embrace the fact that it was a good idea to get E. coli out of hamburger. And as of today, very little, if any, of my law firm revenue is E. coli cases linked to hamburger. I'm not saying you can eat hamburger raw, but it's a hell of a lot safer today than it was 30 years ago. So, when government regulation and litigation and the industry step up, we can make that kind of progress. And some of the technology that exists now has really, really advanced. The Bush administration implemented and funded whole genome sequencing across all health departments. And that's been a big game changer. So, like when you hear about an outbreak, whether it's the boar's head outbreak or listeria or an E. coli outbreak, what we know is the science is so good that all of the people in that outbreak are genetically, that bug that was found in them is genetically matched to each other. And so causation in these outbreaks are very clear. And one of the things that's happening is you might sometimes hear about more outbreaks, but they're smaller because the technology allows people to more quickly understand there's an outbreak and stop it and get that product off the market quicker, so less people get sick, less people die. And interestingly, frankly, there's less lawsuits against companies for poisoning victims. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. The age of the internet, it's more competition, faster response time. Now, I know you wanted to go back a little bit and talk about what has worked over the years. Obviously, we could probably do a whole breakout show just talking about everything that's worked for your firm. So
Yeah.
let's keep it simple. What has worked, Bill, in terms of
So
marketing?
yeah, I mean, Marler Clark existed, in the sense before Google, before, and then, when we used to think of websites kind of like the brochures that used to be in people's lobbies. That's kind of what it was. It was an online brochure, and, most of the cases in the first several years of my practice were cases that lawyers who had no idea what they were doing would refer to us. And that is still a fairly significant amount of the work that we get. But, with the advent of Google and SEO and searches and stuff, that's, been a game changer. And we have to pay attention to not only doing, great work for clients, so clients are appreciative and the word spreads that way, and through, helping lawyers on cases and doing a good job for them. That's all super important, but it's also, as you know, has become real important to pay attention to how your website looks, what words you're using. It's a little bit not the thing that drives me, in the sense of I'm more interested in just doing good work. But
Mm-hmm.
I would be an idiot if I didn't think that I also had to pay attention to the marketing side of things, because, candidly, it's hard for a victim to figure out who in the hell to hire. It's hard. And if you make it harder by not engaging them in social media and SEO and all that, and that sort of thing, if you make it harder for them to find people who are competent, you're not really helping these people. So it's been a journey. And I've been probably embraced this stuff, whether it's blogging or SEO or, hard media. I mean, all of those things come into play to make it now. And now, gosh, no, now we have AI. So, that's a whole nother thing that, lawyers are going to have to deal with. And as search engine optimization changes to AI and how people find you and how that works, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for victims. How do you figure out whether or not, just because a lawyer has a pretty website doesn't mean they know what the hell they're doing. So, it's a tough call.
Yeah, well, one of the things you've done well is really having a strong media mix of lots of different media opportunities where you're speaking and things like that. So there's a lot of social proof, so to speak,
Yeah,
across the web if someone really does that research to look for those digital breadcrumbs. I think the challenge is that not everybody does their due diligence and might,
right.
take things for face value sometimes. Are there any like missed opportunities you feel like are big in terms of the marketing funnel right now that, that would be useful for other law firm owners to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think things are changing. So quickly, as you, I'm sure, know. I mean, it's the, AI is, taking over what used to be sort of normal searches on Google or Bing and other things. Social media, whether it be Facebook, Reddit, all of that, and again, some of that's happening so quickly it's sometimes hard to keep up. So, I definitely have, people who help me with that, and that's been a good thing. So I can, focus on being a good lawyer, and which is, and, doing what I can to make our food supply safer. But again, I think it's certainly going to be a challenge for, how search is going to be with AI, and, how did the AI know what is serving you? I mean, um, I certainly see when AI, answers a question about like the work I do. It seems pretty accurate for the most part. Although I think one time they had me going to a law school that I never attended. So, there's glitches in those systems. It's going to be interesting to see how the marketing side of that's going to play out. Sometimes I just don't know.
Yeah, it's well, technology in general, like every industry, it's going to be fascinating to watch over the years. We're in definitely in an age of digital technology that's going to be fun to watch.
Yep. Yep.
Speaking of technology, let's walk through some of the science involved in what you do. So, talk to me about a scenario where your team has used what's relatively complex science to turn into wins or
Sure.
good information for your clients.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the the Bush administration, right after 9/11, was very, very, very worried about bioterrorism and bioterrorism in our food supply. They obviously got hit with anthrax cases, and they were very concerned about the water supply, food supply, bioterrorism in those areas. And so they invested literally billions and billions and billions of dollars in whole genome sequencing. So what that is, labs across the country, state labs, are able to extract the DNA out of a pathogen like E. coli or Listeria. And then, like, if you're in New York and I'm in California, and the E. coli that's found in me and the E. coli that's found in you is the same whole genome sequenced match, that tells you with high degree of certainty that somehow, some way, you and I are connected. By the food we ate, the place we were, something is connected. And if you have other of those dots across the country, the power that has, that it's kind of like knowing the answer to the math problem, and then you work to how you solve the math problem. That's what science has been able to do in in the food safety space. So these epidemiologists across the country are saying, hey, there's a match in New York, there's a match in California, there's a match in Wyoming, match in Florida. What is the common denominator? And that's the technology that essentially allows for disparate people to be connected and then to identify the product that made them sick. Sometimes the product's there to be tested. Sometimes they do environmental testing and find it there. So it becomes such an airtight case that most of the time defendants are just like, I got no argument. So
Yeah.
but yeah, the technology has been pretty good, and knowing how to use it and knowing how to get it is been really interesting. But I can guarantee you, I'm the only law firm in the country that has a foodborne illness epidemiologist on staff, and we actually have two, and they spend a lot of time interfacing with public health and then figuring out many of these outbreaks.
Yeah, that's it's like soup. It's very fascinating to me. You're in such a unique niche in the law firm space, but it also is like it seems like from a surface level that it's very very specialized, but there's lots of maybe other people who feel that they can kind of fake it till they make it type of thing to kind of carve out a piece of the market share there. It's I'm
Yeah, I mean, most of the, candidly, most of the lawyers who are, nipping at my heels in this space are people who, were friends of friends who asked me to help them out on a case, or they were with firms that referred me work in the past, and then they decided, well, Bill Marler doesn't seem that smart. I should be able to do this on my own. And so, a lot of those, the players who, who do the same kind of work, it's a relatively small percentage of what happens out there. And usually in any food case, I'm the lawyer or my firm's the lawyer, sort of leading the charge. As an example, there was an outbreak linked to a unregulated product in Daily Harvest food 3 years ago, almost right now. And of the 450 people that were sickened, I represent 395. And there's one lawyer here, one lawyer there there's like 50 other lawyers, and they've just essentially sat back and let me figure this whole thing out. And we've, been able to do a settlement, and we're in the process of, distributing the money to, all the victims in an equitable way. So, yeah, I mean, it's part of the game, I suppose. It's part of the game that, like anything in marketing, if someone sees that there's a potential for, to get involved in an area, they're going to stick their hands in it, and they're either going to figure it out or they're going to go away. And some of the lawyers have figured things out, and they've actually started to do pretty good work. So
yeah.
we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, you set the pace for it, and you certainly have,
Yeah.
put a lot of the tools out there that I'm sure are utilized. Okay, I've got to ask you about 40% of our clients are in Texas. And so this is
Mhm.
close to home. Did you
Yeah.
represent any clients in the Bluebell Listeria case?
I did. Yeah, I did in that unfortunate outbreak. And yeah, and I'm actually working with a couple of lawyers in San Antonio on some uh, Gulf oyster Vibrio cases. So
Oh,
I've
yeah.
done
Hmm.
actually a ton of work in Texas over the years. It's a big state, and food products come in
Hmm.
from all different places. There was a listeria outbreak linked to cantaloupe that came out of Colorado, and a number of people who got severely sick and died were Texas residents that I represented. I represented the families of all 33 people that died in that outbreak, and several of them were Texas residents. It's an interesting thing. I think maybe I mentioned this to you about the bluebell, how that outbreak got figured out, and it has a lot to do
Hmm.
with genetic fingerprinting. And the each lab across the country, tries to keep up on their highest technology. And a health department person in South Carolina went to a grocery store, bought a bag of groceries, random things, and took it back to the lab and started testing it. One of the things he bought was a quart of Bluebell ice cream, and it tested positive for listeria. It's a deadly pathogen. They uploaded that to this database. They was able to look to see if there are any matches. They found 3 people in Kansas were an absolute match. So then the investigators looked to see what the common denominator was there, and they all had been in a hospital, and they all ate Bluebell ice cream. And so then that prompted them to go to the Bluebell factory, do testing there, found more listeria, uploaded that. And that's how this outbreak blew up. It all blew up because of one guy doing a test on a quart of ice cream in South Carolina. So that's how incredible this technology is. It obviously had a pretty negative impact on Bluebell, but I think it's changed the way companies, especially frozen food type companies, the things that they do and try to do differently to make sure that doesn't happen to them.
Yeah, Bill, it's fascinating to me the degrees of separation or lack thereof between your firm and all of the major events in this, subspecialty of law over the past 3 or 4 decades. This is probably a bad time to ask this question at this point in your career, but if one growth obstacle could disappear overnight, that would help, propel the scalability of the firm. What would make the largest difference if you could eliminate one growth obstacle?
I think it's really trying to figure out how to have victims have better information so they can make, better choices. But the problem is that some of these people are making decisions, when they're sick, they're in the hospital, they're, they're paying attention to, taking care of funeral arrangements for a family member that died of foodborne illness. I think the answer to your question is there a way to better educate consumers of legal products to make better informed decisions, and how to do that? And I probably am biased to think that if people had better information, they probably would, hire me all the time. But that may be my, maybe 32 years of experience and my ego talking there. But still in all, I think, the most difficult thing I see is making sure consumers have enough adequate, good information to make informed decisions.
Solid advice. Bill, certainly had a very esteemed career. I really appreciate you making the time for the Building Brands podcast. One final question. Any book, any book that would be a good read for a business leader, executive, what would it be?
Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I make all my associates, all the staff read it, and the reason why it's a good read is it really underscores the idea of hard work, putting in the time to create the ability for you to be an expert. That there's just really no way around putting in the hours to make yourself, at the top of your game. And I think when I read that book, it finally dawned on me. It's like, oh, this guy gets me. He gets why I work so hard.
I
And,
love that feeling.
and so I think I think that book has been, I think, helpful to a lot of, especially young lawyers, who want to get successful quick. And the only way to do that is to put in the hours, put in the time, get the expertise, get the experience, because that's what makes the difference between somebody who's a success and somebody who, showed up for a while.
Yeah, I love that feeling of like when you read a good book and you're like, okay, this is me, this connects, this resonates. I'm gonna have to check that out. Give me the author once more. It was Outliers by who?
Malcolm Gladwell. He's written a bunch of different books that are sort of, more psychological stuff, but he does a really good job, I think, in Outliers. I actually think it's his best book. My wife's reading a book called from him called Talking to Strangers, which I've read, and it kind of freaked me out. So I have, but the Outliers is a great read, and I'd urge people to, maybe put that and Poisoned on their reading list. So.
Yeah, well, appreciate the recommendation there. Where can our listeners and viewers learn more about Marler Clark online, Bill?
So at marlerclark.com, it's pretty straightforward. It's Clark without an E, MARLERCLARK.com. And I have a blog, Marler blog, that I think I was up at 2 this morning, pontificating about some food safety thing. And so, yeah, people can. The other thing is I started an online newspaper called Food Safety News 16 years ago. And I have 4 full-time writers. It's not a SEO thing for me. It's an actual straight up news organization that's very well regarded. And so It's my way of, helping, give back to the food safety space, the food safety community.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for our listeners and viewers, I mean, you can simply just do a Google search, William Clark, and I mean, you'll find resource on resource of media references out there on Bill. Bill, it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have had you on the Building Brands podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.